Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Matthew Marset. I have the great pleasure of standing in front of this awesome ensemble that you are enjoying today. The work that you've just heard, Karel Husa's Music for Prague, 1968, set a new tone for wind ensemble writing, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. It changed the way composers from that point in history on have looked at the wind ensemble. There were plenty of concert bands up to that point in history, and no insignificant amount of repertoire, and some truly fine repertoire. But Karel's style of writing was quite different. He gave each individual voice in this unreasonably large ensemble at times their own line. What you heard was every student playing something independent, an incredible challenge, a task that's incredible for any ensemble to put on. I needed to express publicly how incredibly proud I am of this ensemble. That was a magnificent performance. You've, from reading segments or hearing news radio commercials or what you've guessed at this point or read in the program notes, you know that this is, we have the theme for this concert in our time: struggle, courage, and hope. And it's all music that in some way has been inspired by a military action. The first piece that you just heard was inspired after the close of the Prague Spring, the short-term freedom enjoyment for the people of Czechoslovakia, when on August 20th, 1968, 750,000 Eastern Bloc troops invaded the city of Prague to shut down any ideas of freedom. Karel Husa is a native of Prague, a native of Czechoslovakia, or then Czechoslovakia, but was here in the United States at the time. Was teaching at Cornell University and a composer in residence at Ithaca College. And he had the even more terrifying situation of only hearing the news from home, not knowing what really was happening, not understanding completely the emotions of friends, of family, of his community and his people. And this was his response to that. He began composition late in 1968 and finished in 1969 when the piece was premiered by the Ithaca College Wind Ensemble. And since that time, it really has changed the way we look at wind ensemble repertoire. And that includes the rest of the works that you're going to hear today. The second piece on our program, L'Homme Armé by Christopher Marshall, is very different in many different ways. If we could clearly define the struggle, courage, and hope, Husa's rendition clearly is the struggle. You can hear in that powerful piece the struggle of a people. Christopher's work is going to be a bridge between the two. Throughout it, we are going to hear samples of struggle, and we're going to hear samples of courage, of a people trying to overcome. Christopher's piece comes much later in history, composed in 2003, and inspired in part by what he was witnessing while in New Zealand at the time, still living there, and watching on the news, wondering, would the United States truly invade? Would it happen? Would they go back into Iraq a second time? He and the world waiting for an answer to that question, including us here in the United States. Would they really do it? We all know that history tells us it has happened, and it played out in a most interesting way. Christopher, to depict this for us, chose to write the L'Homme Armé in a theme and variations, a form that's been used for centuries, dating back as early as the 15th century, very popular throughout the classical period. Composers Mozart, Haydn, Handel, Beethoven, leading into the Romantic, Brahms, used the theme and variations very often and very, very successfully. And you'll hear that today very successfully. But I think first, to understand this piece, we want you to learn it from the ground up with us. It's a magnificent work. It stands on its own. But the chance to really dig inside is a different kind of experience. If you open your programs to page 7, I hope I'm right on this, there's the text and translation. Now, there's a great fortune. There's a great fortune here at Dartmouth. I have the chance to work with some of the brightest students in the country. And these students come with obvious musical talent, but many, many, many other talents. Some of them fluent in 2 or 3 or 4 languages. My French is comique. So I have the kind assistance of our principal oboe, who you've heard quite a bit of today, and you will continue, Jonathan Webster, Jay Webster, is going to lead us through a little bit of a pronunciation guide, so we can first become familiar with the text, so we understand what it is we're going to hear.
Okay. Repeat after me, line by line. L'homme, l'homme, l'homme armé. L'homme armé doit-on douter? On a fait partout crier que chacun se vienne armé d'un obregon de fer. L'homme, l'homme, l'homme armé. L'homme armé doit-on douter?
Merci. Beautifully done. Now, it has to go a step further, though. You are, of course, at a concert, and you're in a department of music and a wonderful performing arts center. The students want to lead you through this, the chant that this is originally based on. Dating back to the 15th century itself, the L'Homme Armé chant is a French Renaissance chant, and originally was a secular song, was thought to possibly even just be a drinking song. It's found its way into many sacred forms as well. There is no single tune that has had more versions of the ordinary Mass written with it contained. So the students will first take you through the tune so you become familiar with it. They're a wind ensemble, they're a choir, they do it all. But I hear there's a larger choir in this room. There's a reason, if you look above the text, of course, that you have the music supplied. And I'd love it if you would join us through this once. To me, understanding and learning a theme and variations means internalizing that theme. You'll have some help. But will you try this with us? No. Beautiful. There were some people out there not singing. I'm concerned. But beautiful. We now want to show you a little of how Christopher envisioned setting this theme. because a theme in variations, again, means a clear understanding of what is the theme on which this piece is built. Here's how Christopher sets it in the ensemble. You'll hear it largely in a very liturgical style, something that, with a few exceptions here and there, you could imagine hearing in a church setting. On with this beautiful setting of a beautiful old Renaissance chant. Christopher, coming from New Zealand, has many influences in his breadth and experience, and he's talked to us about his experiences with football and rugby and American football, and watching the audiences get very involved in this, and knowing that there were these thoughts and these wonders of what's going to happen with the United States and Iraq. There was this, in his mind, this idea of sort of a macho buildup. And he talks about the rock song, we will rock you. Hear how he sets that within this piece. You take that aggressive percussion line behind everything, and we set an ensemble on top of it in a style that matches. As Christopher was explaining this piece to us, he talks about wanting to honor the many versions of the work that exist, including historical versions of it. There are times throughout the work where we're going to look back at a style of writing, maybe not as modern as the We Will Rock You theme, but rather we look back in history. This next variation has sampling somewhat, you could imagine, of dancing around the maypole, but it's children at play, and when there's children at play, there's often some roughhousing as well. He depicts this roughhousing in most beautiful sound with the bassoons. Listen to how we get that picture. And then we add on top of that, again, an ensemble somewhat thinner and smaller. Nothing partners better with a bassoon than the oboe, such a similar color in family. We hear how this melody comes together. As I mentioned, though, the piece in its most popular use has been used by the church again and again, in music for the church. So Christopher finds ways throughout the work to to slow down the energy, to slow down the momentum. Musically, we would refer to it as augmentation of the theme. This next one of the later iterations of the theme, set for us by the horns, shows us this theme extended and expanded. It's just slow, beautiful chorale style of writing. Christopher had the idea of taking it even further, though. I mean, that's very clear, very beautiful. The idea of a chorale, the sound of the horns, there's nothing can change that impression for us. But he's found a way to capture the sound of the cathedral. If you could envision standing inside of one of the great cathedrals throughout the world, these spaces that are several hundred feet long and 100 feet high or more, you know that the slightest whisper bounces back in echoes, sometimes with a delay of half a second, 3/4 of a second, or a second or more. And Christopher finds a way to do that with the help of the upper woodwinds. Listen to how this fits together. I mentioned as we first started that Christopher lived for most of his life in New Zealand, and he's had an incredible breadth of influences. For those that were able to make the pre-concert talk, he talked about the haka chant, an ancient tribal chant that was about inspiring energy and inspiring battle, and this again being a piece inspired by the military actions of a nation. He finds a way to sew that in for us. In order to make the haka chant, which has words kamate ka ora, if I live, if I die, the true words of a warrior. In order to make this work and partner so beautifully with this gorgeous melody, the first thing we have to do is rough up the melody a little bit. Here it is in the low brasses with a little bit edge to it. We layer on top of that a musical setting of this actual haka chant. This is with the help of the higher woodwinds and the higher brasses. And finally, we put the two layers together and we get the most incredible aggressive sound. No better sound you can imagine of turning this into a true chant for war. After all of that heavy, incredible battle, there's an unfortunate side to any battle, and that unfortunate side is the side of loss. Very often we are left hearing of those who have lost their lives, of families who have lost loved ones, and we're left looking for ways to honor the memory of those who have been lost. Here, Christopher uses just a few select solo instruments in just the most imaginative way. He uses the practice of writing in canon, which is the offset of the start of a melody, so that the two pieces overlay, playing along at different times. Here, in this canonic variation, you'll hear the trumpet set up the melody for us, this tune that you've come to know, the L'Homme Armé chant, so beautifully. And then you'll hear the entrance of the euphonium, and if you listen carefully, the euphonium is playing the exact same tune, completely upside down. So instead of the first motion being up, the first motion of the euphonium will follow down. Listen carefully. Beautiful, isn't it? And then the final race to the end. Christopher has stories to tell of the many images that have gone through his head. Composers, I think many composers write with some sort of imagery in their mind, and then they find a way to set music to that imagery. Musicians operate in the same way. We are handed music by a great composer, and we try and reassemble an image that makes sense to us. Here, this I think has a different connotation for some of us maybe. Listen to how he uses that theme that we've become familiar with to accelerate toward the end. It's basically a race to the finish. Maybe smugly, if we can recall back to not very far into 2004, seeing mission accomplished banners waving on the tops of battleships after only a short amount of time. Yet here in 2010, we're still there. But in that race to get the job done, Christopher finds a way to create the same energy in the music. Hear how, we'll be going through 4 different versions of it, one and then the next. And listen just to how he continues to accelerate it, to keep the theme intact, but gaining momentum, gaining energy all along. And that race to the end, you can imagine, ends with an incredible crash, an incredible bang, and some wonderful sounds of war. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further delay or longer commentary maybe, Christopher Marshall's L'Homme Armé. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I learned something while I was back there. I learned that there is no page 7 in your program. I promise you, the document that I sent in had 11 pages, and page 7, there it was. Yikes. So I apologize. Thank you for your candor and the singing that you had done. The second half of our program continues the theme and the idea. This next work by David Del Tredici now we've finished the bridge of struggle, and we've worked our way fully into courage. David is another Pulitzer Prize-winning composer, known most for his works for the opera stage, and this was his first, I hate using this word because it's so wrong, his first attempt, but his first masterpiece for the wind ensemble. And it is just that, yet another masterpiece. Again, inspired by the United States movement toward Iraq in 2003, David tells the story to us that as he was sitting at home watching the news, he would have the television on full volume and a radio on full volume and have all of this noise around him with what was happening, and be writing the music at the same time. When you hear this music, it's a little tough to imagine that. David's voice is very romantic in style. You will hear moments of Beethoven hidden throughout. You will hear moments of Brahms. And then there'll be a pop quiz at the end. There's a moment from Wagner, and what we're looking for, name that tune, a direct quote that is one of the most magnificent moments in the orchestral, or I'll even give you the hint and say the opera repertoire. The piece is structured in 2 movements. The 2 movements are continuous. There won't be a break in between. The first movement features more so the woodwinds than the brasses. You'll hear quite a bit of woodwind playing, and the sounds are very bright and very high. The second movement focuses on the brasses, and most of the activity is there. The woodwinds are as color instruments and as used in a different way throughout that movement. Both are similar in structure. David also talks about envisioning waves crashing on a shore in the way that waves of soldiers would move into a town or move to the battle lines. So you'll hear that clearly in the music. There are phrases of various lengths that approach and grow and crash and then return again and retract. And again, approach and grow and crash. It's really a brilliant style of writing. So, without any further delay, David Del Tredici's In Wartime. The final piece on our program then finally represents that final piece, that piece of hope. There's no questioning that the last year, the last 2 years, the last 3 years have been, or maybe longer, have been a difficult time for not only our nation, but for our world. The incredible young people sitting on this stage are that hope. They are the ones that we're looking to and we will turn to. I can tell you from having the chance to spend as much time as I possibly can with them every week, I have all the hope in the world. There's no doubt that they'll continue from here doing great things, both in music, I hope, and in the world at large. This final piece by Ron Nelson completely changes the game from what you've been hearing. You've been hearing dark and intense and emotionally charged. And this is emotionally charged, but with just the right emotion, with the feeling of exuberance, of joy. Joy personified in music, in the very best of ways. I mentioned in the program notes, which I hope it's in those notes, that the piece was commissioned by Frederick Fennell. Frederick Fennell is one of the great fathers of the wind ensemble. He created the wind ensemble at the Eastman School of Music, and that also set the new standard for what a wind ensemble would be. This wind symphony before you today largely really is a wind ensemble, plus with slight augmentation. But Fennell had a fantastically prestigious career, including conducting one of the world's premier wind ensembles, the Tokyo Kasai Wind Orchestra in Tokyo, Japan. And while he was in Japan, he was in Hiroshima. And he tells the story that he was in his hotel room and he was awakened by the sun rising over this magnificent city that had been rebuilt. By this point, we were in the late 80s. A city that had been, at one time, completely decimated and now completely rebuilt. And a people that went from possibly one of the toughest moments in history to being a rebuilt people of peace and hope for the future. The story is that Frederick got on the phone that day to call back to the U.S. and get in touch with Ron Nelson and say, this is the piece that I need. This is the sound that I need. And it was only 3 months later that he had the chance to premiere it with the Tokyo Kasai Wind Ensemble in Hiroshima. So first, I want to again thank you for joining us this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed this program. And now, Ron Nelson's Morning Alleluias for the Winter Solstice.
Thank you.